Hello, good morning. This morning when we're recording this. This is episode 5 of my Mums to Words interview, which complements the long-going attempt of writing a book, Mums the Word. But I've set myself a target now that it's going to be finished before Christmas. And I will add a year onto that. So Christmas 2023, because I could quite easily say I meant next Christmas. And I'm really lucky to be joined by Natalie. So I've known Natalie professionally, I would say, for well, probably 8 years now. So Natalie is one of the co-founders of the Smile Group and also now part of the Hearts and Minds Partnership. Thank you for your time because I know you're extremely busy, Natalie. Do you want to just tell us about your children, their ages, and also the story behind Smile and now your role currently with Hearts and Minds as well?
Oh, well, firstly, thank you so much for inviting me to have this conversation. It's lovely to be here. So I have two children, one teenager now. So my son is just turned 13, and I have a daughter who is 8, but in her head going on 18, forces of nature. And the birth of my son was the catapult really to set Smile up, because I had a really difficult experience postnatally. I had a really good pregnancy, but felt really quite unwell from the off, kind of after I'd had him. I had quite a difficult delivery and emotionally just didn't feel great at all. And that really led to me seeking support quite early from medical professionals, because I felt quite low and really, really anxious. I didn't fully understand how I was feeling. So I was really keen to research, find out, like look outside and see what was going on. And it's a good 13 years ago. So it was a really different landscape to now, frankly. Even the words perinatal mental health weren't known or understood. So it was quite difficult. And it was only really when I spoke to my doctor and was getting quite frustrated because I wasn't able to access talk therapy very quickly and I felt very vulnerable, that I just said, I don't understand why there's nowhere for people to go in the community. Why does that not exist? And that was like, oh, it was like a light bulb moment, even in the midst of all the horrors of it. And eventually, through my health visitor, I was put in touch with Ruth Williams, another mum who had had a similar but different experience. We'd come to it slightly differently. And as soon as we met, we just knew it was going to happen. It was one of those moments where we're like, okay, the stars have collided. Here we go. Let's see what happens. And we didn't have a very clear plan for Smile, but it was in our hearts, the intention. And I think that's the thing, as you'll know, it's the passion that really carried us through those really tricky early learning curves of setting up an organization.
Yeah.
Flipping it, we did it juggling with children, went on to have more children and pretty much almost full-time jobs, which was really hard, really, really hard. But so, as you'll know, so incredibly rewarding to see that we created something that just wasn't there and that was really needed in the community. So fast forward 12 and a half years and Smile has grown really organically, covers Cheshire East with 4 weekly peer support groups, one-to-one talk therapy, monthly family sessions and home visits program, which enables people to have a healthcare professional referral so that someone can come and see them in the comfort and safety of their own home. So it's been an incredible journey. And as you know, it's really challenging at times. And I think that's what led us to become part of a national partnership, in that we were having loads of conversations within the community, which is, you know, is fairly close knit, and thinking, why is there no national way of coordinating all these incredible organizations on the ground and harnessing the amazing potential that exists in the grassroots, bring them together to learn from each other. We set up a map to map services so that people could recognise what's available in their local community via our website, which is, we've had about 80 odd submissions now, which is really good to see. And then creating spaces for people to come together, talk about the reality of what it takes to run an organisation, the good stuff, celebrate the good stuff, but also talk very openly and honestly about the difficult stuff and how in reality we just need greater support, like nationally, in terms of investment that's sustainable. So some of the meaty stuff which I actually really love doing. So it's fulfilled. Basically, I worked in PR for 20 years and I feel like those skills have now transferred over into this amazing community. And for me, it's been really rewarding career-wise as well. So
And
Sorry, that's
that's important, isn't it? And for the work that you do, so today is the 11th of September that we're recording this, and yesterday was Suicide Prevention Day,
yeah.
and it was on the news this morning about suicide and still suicide being high in new mums and things. So to put my book in context, it's Journey of Motherhood.
Mm-hmm.
From every stage, because no stage is easier than others.
Gosh, no.
And different people, different mums will have different challenges depending on that chapter in their mothering journey, really. And it's capturing other stories of everybody. Um, because as you will know, we need to speak honestly about our mothering journey, don't we? And I think that's the beauty of peer support that you offer. And that's what I wanted to capture in my book. It's not the practical advice. It's not no experts as this is how it was for me. And some days was tough or this worked or, you know, but not, it takes a lot to talk honestly about being a mum, doesn't it?
It does. And I think that that's always been the premise behind our work, is creating safe spaces for honest
Mm,
conversations,
mm,
because I'm sure you'll have seen the same in your own service, that the relief that people feel when they're amongst people where they feel they're safe and they're not being judged, to be open and honest about how hard it can be, and how isolating it can be when we create, because there's a lot of judgment around motherhood, isn't
yeah,
there?
yeah,
Invisible and some overt judgment. And then you've got all these media representations, and things like Instagram can be really helpful if you're alone.
yeah,
It can also be really harmful in that
mm,
it's saying this is the idyllic way that it needs to look, and if you don't fulfill that, it leaves you feeling like, what's wrong with me then, because that's not my experience. So I think it's a fine line. You don't want to scare people, but equally you want to say, yeah, you can be honest here about how it actually is.
yeah, definitely. And, different challenges that people don't talk about. I did an Instagram post yesterday and just said, I'm done with primary school. I mean, I've got three children.
Yeah.
One's just left secondary school, one's near 10, and Dylan's now in the last year. I'm done. It's nothing about the school. It's nothing about the other parents. I'm just in my mind. I'm just a secondary school mum now.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And I think because all my mum friends, they're even done with secondary school, so they're laughing their head off because I went to have the third. That I'm
Yeah,
still at
yeah,
primary and got the
yeah,
whole
yeah.
three ahead.
Well, yeah, well, so am I. And I always joke about being one of the older mums at the gate, just because I had children slightly older than, because we had a gap between our kids as well. Because
Mm,
I genuinely think I wasn't going to have another child after having my son, because it was such a difficult
mm,
experience. And then nature took over, and there was a real urge to have a sibling if possible. So my daughter arrived 4.5 years later, and that's an interesting thing when you have a bit of a gap, isn't it?
yeah,
But
yeah.
like you, I think I found the transition to secondary school really hard as a
Mm,
mum. I found it
mm.
really difficult. I think that's not often spoken about either.
No, no.
Like, I didn't know how far to step back. I didn't know what I was supposed to be
Yeah,
doing. I didn't know
yeah,
how to give him responsibility, but not too much
yeah. And
responsibility
that's
for
the
me,
chapter I've just finished actually. And it
Yeah.
is that you want them to be resilient, and I'm very controlling. So I want to know that they've done everything right.
Yeah,
And
me too.
it's
Me
getting
too.
that balance really difficult.
Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it?
It's
But
hard.
also I like I'm very lucky, aren't we, to have come through that very agonizing, difficult stage when I was unwell and I had perinatal mental health challenges. And I find it's a real privilege now to be in a group setting, even though I do feel slightly removed because my children are a bit older,
Mm,
to be able to say from the heart, I totally get how difficult it is. I'm
mm,
not having exactly the same experience as you, but I
mm,
know that feeling
mm,
of this will never change. This is horrific. I can't get out
mm,
of this. That panic I
mm,
used to feel.
mm,
And to be able to say, I promise you it will not last. It will
mm,
change. It
mm.
will. I found, like, for me, when I was in that, to hear that from someone else was so important. It
Yeah,
was almost carried a bit more weight than a medical point of view. It was
yeah.
useful to know the medical stuff, but to have someone who knew that path, who had
Mm,
trodden that path, to say,
mm,
you're going to be okay, and you
mm.
actually are okay now, you just don't
Yeah.
see it. Yeah, that was really important.
Mm, mm. And you mentioned about, going back to your roots of PR, that was my biggest struggle was the loss of self. didn't
Yes.
know who I was, didn't know what my purpose was. You know, my son, my second child, was really poorly. So I think that was my biggest struggle, and in hindsight, probably really, really low, but
Yeah.
didn't recognize at the time.
Yeah.
But it is nice when you feel you've got that purpose again, and there's a fire in your belly over something, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's a very interesting conversation around identity and motherhood. I think really, really interesting. My experience is that I just
Mm,
completely lost
mm,
myself in that process, and I was felt like I was really at sea. I didn't know who
mm,
I was.
mm,
I was just somebody's mum. I wasn't even me in
mm,
my own right.
mm,
You know, in that community of going to mother and baby groups, I felt redundant, and I also felt like I was doing an awful job at the same time. So it
mm,
was like a double whammy. But I also see now that there was an inevitability to that, really, even though it was quite brutal,
mm,
almost dismantling of how I was.
mm,
And I felt like I had to do that in order to recreate a stronger version of me, that actually becoming a mum brought out something quite, like, I don't know, feel like a lioness sometimes.
mm,
And I
mm,
also think if I can get through that, I can do anything, because that was
mm,
absolutely the most confronting experience ever. And it was, you know, so bewildering. But
mm,
to actually come through that and trust in life, that prompted me to then go and explore I became a coach. Like, I've been
mm,
coaching for 4.5 years now about that whole discomfort of those experiences, and still often talk with people about the fact that that's okay. It's
mm,
very uncomfortable and it's very difficult, but it's okay to feel that. And
mm.
actually, something beautiful might emerge from that.
Yeah.
You don't know, do you?
Yeah, like you say, it from that it can be very empowering because
Mm,
you really root with what you want out of life as well, don't you? And what is your purpose now? And it can be a mum and have another purpose. And I'm
yeah.
like you know, I to look back now and think, what was I even thinking of starting a charity when I had a little one and I was still doing my had I? Yeah, no, I just qualified as a counsellor while I was pregnant and then went on to do that. But again, I found my purpose, and a bit like with Smile, you knew it was needed because people
Mm,
were engaging quite early on.
yeah.
So those grassroots services, I love that whole grassroots and how important we are as the
Mhm.
charity sector to other people as well.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. I mean, I sound biased because it's not just about, of course, it's not just about Smile, it's about anybody offering
Yeah.
that kind of
Mm,
service. Because I'm very fortunate to be able to move in those networks now and talk to people who've done what we have done and gone through various different experiences. And we just know the impact it has on people's lives because it's heartfelt. But it's not just that. I think people often make an assumption about a grassroots service, that it's a bit like, oh, a little coffee morning and people are going to have a
mm,
good time.
mm,
And that's not to disrespect that, but
mm,
the support that we offer
mm,
is underpinned by so much rigor and so much
mm, mm.
professionalism, and it's really agile and it's really versatile. And actually, in COVID, we were from, like, we were the ones that quickly offered a new service and were able to
This is, I've
adapt.
been saying this all the time. I did a blog on that. And nobody other than the third sector could change what they did one week to another to
No,
respond.
no. And I think the third sector is incredible, and I think it's got this its own momentum, which is so powerful. But it does need a bit more recognition, and I think
Mm,
this is what we would love to do now collectively within the community, is make the case and
yeah.
say, stop, listen to what we're doing it
Mm,
really well on the ground, we know what we're
mm,
doing, we've learned the hard way, we're continuing to learn all the time. But there's lots of initiatives now that are coming in from government that are all about sort of replicating that over the
mm,
top. But we're saying, no,
mm.
we're doing it
Yeah, yeah.
already.
Mm,
Listen to us and let us do it, and give us the
yeah.
resources to make it last for a
Mm,
long time.
mm,
And you will find that families will get an amazing return on investment for any
mm.
money that you put into this sector.
Oh, definitely, yeah. And another part of my book is and I debated whether to weave it into the book, but I have because it massively impacts me, is mums in leadership, because we're always ultimately responsible, aren't we?
Mm-hmm.
And that's been tricky with my kids growing up. You know, I think with my daughter particularly, sometimes she's resented the charity, but I'm responsible for keeping people in jobs, other mums, in a lot of cases, responsible for the service users and responsible for the funders. And this, I have to say, it's not about just turning off because we're on holiday or something. And I do, but ultimately, I need to be available if something massive happened. And like with your charity, there's a high risk of safeguarding, so always making sure that that's there. But that balance sometimes is really hard. I mean, a few of my friends have helped contribute to the book, and they've been head teachers, and they have that same. They might be on summer holidays. Ultimately, they're still head teacher of that school, and that's a hard balance as a mum, isn't it? To get
Yes.
that right for everybody, really.
Yeah, and I do think that there's a space again for more honest conversations about the reality of being a mum who's juggling a career, and where that leaves you compromising because we can't do everything, and where we need support, and actually to question what is a very rigid system ultimately, because it's not fit for purpose in many ways, is it? So I think that what we try and do is we create our own versions of it to say, this is how we can do it. I work in a team with other women who have children of similar age to, they're a similar age to me, and we've got this amazing way of working where we're really flexible, but we're really super productive, skilled people. But we also say we know that we're going to work best if we do it in our own way, not with very harsh parameters about when you need to be at your desk and how you deliver. Very like corporate old-fashioned stuff. I think the world needs to be more flexible, and to realize that, like, sometimes the feminine, or the masculine feminine kind of stuff, that there are some incredible collaborative powers within female networks that can be really like beautiful and need to be balanced against some of that more alphaisms kind of going on.
I know what we have to retain. I mean, definitely it's something I've wrote about, and everyone's probably sick of thinking about it. The one thing that tips me is emails and texts from school. I feel like I'm full to here anyway. Once they come through, I overspill. I much preferred it. We were talking about this at weekend, where it was all paper, because I could lay it out, and I was more organised that way. But when I'm here and my phone will go off, I think I'll look at that later, and then I forget. And school trip needs to be in tomorrow, and I write quite a bit about that in my book. But my kids organise me now. They'll make sure, right, well, we need to print that off, and then can you just sign it? And it's like, yeah, okay. Now they're that bit older, but it's that retention of information sometimes,
It's
isn't
really
it?
hard, isn't it? And learning to be a bit gentler with yourself, because I've been quite critical of myself sometimes for not acing it all the time. We can't do that anyway. And like, I've got good friends who are like my school admin friends who tell me stuff. I couldn't live without the school Facebook, like the group that for our year, where they say, hold on, do you know that this is happening? Does anyone want to help with this? And I find that's really lovely, because it's really collaborative and it's supportive. And recognizing that it's really hard to juggle it all, really, really hard, isn't it? So yeah, I think we do have a span of information, then we reach saturation. But equally, I'm getting a bit better now at being like, no, I don't need to do that now. That can wait. That can wait. We don't have to. But it's hard because my tendency is to want to do it all.
Yeah. And I've said that to the kids. If it doesn't have to be tomorrow, I'll do it Friday night, Saturday morning. That's your time to go through the emails. And they do loads of activities, and it's great. Their scouts are really active, but gosh, got to be on it. And always like making sure, like you say, I have to say to kids, it doesn't have to be now, because we've got plenty of time, isn't it? The deadline's not for another 4 weeks. It will get done, rather than overstretching to get it done as well. But
that's why I love programs like Motherland, because I mean, God, have you ever seen a program that so incredibly captures the reality?
Of the playground.
It's so beautifully written, is it? And I often joke, I am Julia, like doing the last minute shoe shop on the day before term and not being able to find any size 2s everywhere, and like, and it's kind of like, do you know what? It's funny, but it's true, and it's okay, because we can be messy, we can be chaotic, we don't have to always have it together. That's all right. It's all right.
And like you say about that Facebook group, it's I think I've started to write about it a bit and use it, but it's having your tribe into
Yeah.
And I have different tribes for different things, but it is making sure you're supported, and that can be difficult as a mum to first of all establish who perhaps that friends or the tribe or whatever you want to call it, who can you trust in that.
Finding your place in the playground, that's a really good one, isn't it, in primary school? there isn't really one in secondary school, but it's like
Yeah.
going back to school again, isn't it? Where you're like, oh, who do I talk to? Where do I stand?
Yeah, yeah. And that is definitely, I remember writing that, and I've had to shorten that because that was a big part of the book. And then I thought, if anybody's just entering the playground, they'll think, oh my life. But I do put the playground was my stuff and not the other stuff. It was my insecurities at
Yes,
that
it
time
is.
of
It
life.
is. Yeah, definitely. And
You know,
it's like the filter of all your memories of
yeah,
school coming back, aren't they? Which is
yeah.
interesting.
And I worked shifts, so I was either shattered because I'd just come off a long shift, or so all that I went, not feeling the best about myself at the
Yeah,
time.
yeah, yeah.
But again, this is all a part of the journey that is
It is.
has trials and tribulations with it, but
It
also
does.
great rewards.
Yeah, exactly that. Exactly that. It's like the most enormous experience you'll ever
Mm,
have, I think, being a
mm,
parent. So confronting, takes you right to the edge, but also you cannot find the words to describe how
mm.
immeasurably it changes your life in terms of the fulfillment that you get from it as well, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So I've been asking two questions to everybody. And the first one is, what was that light bulb moment where you think, this is it, I'm a mum now? Can you remember? Was it in the first few hours, days, weeks, or?
I think I'm gonna change the answer in terms of probably not going to answer that question, but I think that I will realize I first realized the joy of motherhood because I didn't feel the joy of motherhood for a long time, and I felt
Mm,
wretched about the fact that I didn't feel the joy. And I do remember having the first proper flood of it when my son was about 8 or 9 months old, and we went to the seaside for the first time, and he was in one of those little carriers and showed him the sea, and I was like, oh gosh, I felt something viscerally come through me then.
mm,
And now I know what people are talking about. It's
mm.
almost like I thought, like, that's a conspiracy. I don't really understand what everyone's saying about
Yeah.
it being so joyful. And I suddenly had this really felt experience of it. And I genuinely think this is a very long-winded response to your question,
No,
is
no, it's
that
fine.
there was so much fear and so much like trauma stuff that was packing down all the natural
Mm,
feelings.
mm,
It was only when that started to dissipate that the joy was always there. And I was like, oh,
mm,
there it is. It
mm.
was lovely.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it that feeling is so hard to give any kind of words to, isn't
Oh,
it?
yeah, 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 yeah. Definitely, definitely.
And the other question is, what piece of advice has always stuck with you off anybody or throughout the mothering journey, really?
Well, you get a lot of advice, don't you? And I
Mm,
think some of it is really hard to filter when you're a new parent
mm,
because I, like many parents, wanted to do it really well and
mm.
felt like I was getting bombarded with information. And it was so difficult to know what was the right
Yeah.
information, like whether, and it was conflicting. That's the really
Mm,
difficult things. You get
mm,
contradictory advice from different sources.
mm,
And I'm like quite an analytical mind. So I'd be
mm.
like, my mind would be just racing with it all, thinking, I don't know how to assimilate that. And I think, and it probably came more with my second child, just having that inner confidence to go, I'm going to do what feels right for me. I'm
Mm,
going to go with my instincts rather
yeah,
than react all the time to what I'm told I should be doing.
yeah,
And I don't think you can really get that until you've been through it,
mm, mm,
unfortunately, because there's no theory when it comes.
mm,
Like, if there was theory, a textbook, I mean, it would be completely sold out, wouldn't it? That
yeah,
actually told you how to manage this
exactly that. Yeah,
experience.
yeah.
You have to live it to know it, don't you?
And
And I think,
motherhood's fluid, isn't it? What works for you at the time,
oh
as I
my God,
say,
I just
I
want,
worked shifts. We were really, struggling. It was the recession. Steve was a builder, so what worked for us wouldn't have worked for another family. We just
no.
had to get through, and we had to do the shifts, and it was a job that worked in so many other ways.
Yeah. And I think
So,
that it's so easy when you become a parent to lose your faith in your own ability to make a decision.
yeah.
I
Mm,
felt crumbled by the fact that I couldn't trust my own decision making.
mm,
And then over time, I was able to feel into it and be like, there it is. I
mm.
know now that that's that
Yeah,
feeling.
yeah,
Like, to give myself the space to come back. I might listen to some people who I trust around me, but ultimately I'm going to go with that feeling.
yeah, yeah. Well, thanks ever so much. Really, really do appreciate it. And I think it just gives different people lots dynamics, and hopefully to enjoy motherhood and not be too hard on themselves
Oh,
as well.
thank you, Kate. Thank you.
So I appreciate your time and your honesty for this as well. So thank you.